The first is theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to take other people's perspective. So when I'm standing up lecturing in a class and my students start jiggling their keys, I know they want to go. I think we talked about that earlier. Or if I see a little kiddo who's usually attentive, kind of wandering around in their seat a little bit, I think, oh, they may need to go to the restroom. Let me do that. So I look around the world and I kind of order what's going on by being able to take other people's perspective about why they're doing what they're doing or what their behavior means to me. And so I use all of that social perspective ability to predict the relationship between what's happening, the external state of affairs, and what's happening in their mind, the internal state of mind. So, for instance, if I have a student who's perpetually sleeping in my class, I can think of several scenarios. I could take it personally and think, oh gosh, I'm just so boring that they can't stay awake. Or I could think, well, maybe they have a new baby at home and they're not getting enough sleep. Or I could think maybe they're working extra jobs, or they had a final exam and they just didn't get enough sleep. So I can think of many ways to explain their behavior. I can take their point of view. So, some effects of theory of mind dysfunction on social functioning at school. One, because children with autism have trouble predicting behavior because they have trouble taking their point of view. People kind of seem to act randomly. And for this reason, people with autism tend to cling to things being orderly and the same because novelty is difficult for them. They don't predict and infer from the situation as well as others. Secondly, they can't keep secrets because a secret means one mind can know something and the other mind can't. And what that means is they really have to understand theory of mind, don't they? At that point, you have to really be able to take the fact that people have other minds and other perspectives to heart, and sometimes that's difficult. Theory of mind starts developing, and first order of theory of mind comes in somewhere around 3 years of age. And that means, I think I know what you're thinking. That's why it becomes so much easier to teach sharing at that point, because the child actually gets, oh, she wants to play with that toy too. Then second order theory of mind comes in somewhere around 6 years of age. So I think I know what you're thinking about her, right? I think I know what Cindy thinks about Joni. And it keeps on perfecting itself, really, until well past middle school, doesn't it? Or even later. So children then know what everybody thinks about everybody else. That's why all those horrible slam books and things like that come into play, where they really, I think my daughter knew what every single person thought about every other person in their middle school. It was very concerning to me that that was the focus of what she was thinking about at that time. But if you really think about that, that is kind of the developmental level for learning multiple perspectives, isn't it? Because then what do we ask them to do later on? We ask them to compare and contrast. We ask them to debate things. We ask them to write persuasive essays. All of those kinds of things come from that social emotional development in middle school, where they're learning what everybody thinks about everybody else, although it can be quite trying at times for adults, I think. So therefore, keeping secrets is difficult. Lacking remorse can be difficult, because if I have remorse, I'm worried about what you're thinking of me, right? Which means I recognize you have a different mind. And then sharing and taking turns is difficult. Children with autism rarely embarrass early on. And let's take a minute and say, okay, so children, typically developing children, get first order mind 3 years of age, second order mind 6 years of age, and then they keep on developing in that complexity. Kids with autism sometimes don't get first order theory mind until age 6. And then they get second order theory of mind sometimes not until middle school, where there's a bigger social push for them. So other kids have had years of working on lying, on working on being remorseful, all those kinds of things that make us more socially acceptable. And they're just in middle school working on that stuff, so they get caught all the time because they're not very good at it. They've only been doing it for a little while, and then they lack remorse, and then they get in more and more trouble. So the whole kind of result is that they may appear very self-centered and egocentric and uncaring, and in fact sometimes they are, but not because they have chosen to be that way, but because they simply don't understand the social context and situations and social perspectives as well, or as with as much complexity as others. So they're unable to kind of integrate all that information together. But I've often had children with autism who, once I helped them to understand the situation, were simply mortified that they were treating someone else that way. Their hearts were wonderful and warm and generous. They just didn't understand the situation. So what does theory of mind in school mean? It means that they're going to have difficulty with certain text genre, aren't they? Because there are a lot of inferencing requirements in many of the things that we ask them to read. So they're often good decoders, but poor comprehension, and we'll talk more about that later. But if you have to gather clues about how people are feeling and get things from multiple contexts, such as narratives, oh my goodness, there's a problem, and we've all banded together, we're going to band together and work on this problem, and man, don't we feel good because we hit this goal. That all takes a great deal of social perspective to understand the complexity of how all of those little episodes might weave together. Whereas early expositories might be much easier for them because they're factual, aren't they? So-and-so lives in Peru, they live in the trees, they eat certain things, all of that kind of stuff would be easier. Those facts would be easier for them. However, as we get into more and more expository genre, like persuasive arguments, debating, all of those kinds of things that require multiple perspective, again, the child with autism is going to have difficulty. So I just want to remind you that that inability to predict makes children with autism want consistent routines, and it's important for all of us to have some consistency in our routines. It's just a matter of trying to kind of ride that line between never changing anything and teaching them how to transition, build in safe flexibility so they have the basic framework, but they can roll with the punches. We can't simply say, oh, they need to do this because that's what it's like when they get in the real world. They'll try, but they'll fail. We have to give them safe and supported flexibility and teach them how to cope with those changes, teach them how to be observant and make inferences. That is so important. Teaching prediction, both in academic skills and reading comprehension and in social situation, is imperative. I just want to mention that theory of mind in school impacts social situations on every single level. I often hear, oh, well, social skills, they're not academic. Well, as we just talked about in reading comprehension and in writing literacy issues, absolutely it impacts their ability to understand, infer, and predict things and to be able to really get the gist of what's being given to them. Also, our learning situations are quite social. We use cooperative learning groups all the time. And even now in college, when I say, oh, we're going to have a cooperative learning group, or we're going to have a group project, everybody groans because they don't really understand what their role will be. They know they have to jockey for it, and we have good social skills, right? School discourse, how to talk within the class, how to contribute within the class. Those all have social inferencing and social rules. Peer interactions in the hall, in the lunchroom, at PE, everywhere you see impacts the school learning situation.